My dear comrades, good afternoon. Today we are conducting another training of the strategic deterrence forces. We will work out the actions of officials to manage the use of nuclear weapons with practical launches of ballistic and cruise missiles. I would like to note right away that Russia reaffirms its principled position that the use of nuclear weapons is an extremely exceptional measure to ensure the security of a state. At the same time, we are well aware that it is the nuclear triad that continues to be a reliable guarantor of the sovereignty and security of our country.
Putin is again scaring everyone with nuclear weapons. The DPRK is throwing troops into Ukraine. Who can prepare the palace period in Kremlin? We are not only talking about this today with the host of Khodorkovsky Live, Sergei Aslanyan. Sergei, we are glad to welcome you. Hello. Before we start our communication with you, we first address our audience here. We ask you to like this video in advance. If you don't like it, take it away at the end. Also right now, where you are watching us from, your city, your country, we are very interested in the geography of our audience. And subscribe to our YouTube channel, because this is the only way the messages that we are going to discuss right now will be heard by as many people as possible. And, Sergei, I propose to start with what the dictator Putin said this week. He said that there would be launches of ballistic and multiple missiles as part of training in the use of nuclear weapons in Russia. Sergei, a question for you. Why did Putin take out his nuclear weapons again? Who does he want to scare with this? And the main message of these exercises in your understanding and in your interpretation. This is the umpteenth time he gathers people to win a war on his desk. There is some kind of 18th, 19th. Every time he actually has the same thing, because there is no news, but still attracting attention to himself is very important. This is a kind of narcissistic dictator, who at all costs is supposed to be offered fresh flowers and severed heads. Here it turns out that in fact, what are they talking about in connection with Putin? Last time there was more or less a wave that concerned the BRICS, but it so happened that he was not very praised. Then again there was an information lull. Here's what else can be said about Putin. He no longer rides a bear, he doesn't fly with Siberian cranes to race, he hasn't dived for amphorae for a long time, he hasn't cut it on 3 yellow Kalinas. Well, what else? How come? After all, the number one person on planet Earth, which means nuclear training again. Moreover, we are working on something here, now in the conditions of real launches. And indeed, he will have some missiles flying somewhere, and everyone around him will make the right decision, and, as you can see, he is doing it perfectly. They look there, they looked here. The more often he cries, wolves, the less scary it is for everyone. If 2 years ago they said, you know, now we will drive this bear out of the den with sticks, he will snap and throw something poisonous, and everyone will die. Now it has become so common that our dinner today is fried sausages with potatoes, and Putin again says something about the nuclear threat. And now, as Putin escalates, the rest of the world is first getting used to it. Well, look, Putin is again with a nuclear button. Well, here is Putin again, yes. And secondly, it is inevitable. Everywhere, one way or another, some kind of explanation is required. That's when it hits us in hand ho, house vice, what to do there. And we have a parallel here in France. If it falls on us, what should we do? And they explain everything, you know. Well, first of all, these are nuclear weapons, which, well, will definitely not split the planet. Of course, it is unpleasant. I saw with my own eyes, he believes that he died, but he died instantly. In fact, the radius is small. Well, yes, there's a shock wave, there's alpha radiation, well, of course, there's still going to be a flash. Well, in general, of course, it is somehow destructive, but the city as a whole will definitely not work out at once. And in general, in principle, there is nothing wrong with this. And now, as Putin undertakes to win the war at his desk, in the same way, those who explain that nothing terrible will happen, and everyone begins to believe. And they say, oh, Putin, well, it seems that it will be some kind of bombing, but, firstly, not terrible, secondly, not fatal, thirdly, it will definitely not affect us, fourthly, not so destructive. When Putin is told for the 25th time that now we have worked out something there again, something flew somewhere, as if it exploded, well, they will itch somehow, of course. They will say what we have today. The Russians have something nuclear again. And it's not interesting at all. And Putin has no other arguments. He cannot win the war. There are no serious leaks, there are no curious ones. Well, except that his runners are now stupid. Minus, well, at least 4 promising governors of future regions. Because, after all, his personal guards, who declassified a very important, very mysterious object, will not receive a promotion, of course. Well, maybe they've even been shot somewhere in the basement. That's where he goes. Nothing else interesting. It remains to play the nuclear fool. Sergei, also Russian Defense Minister Belousov, said the following, that the RF armed forces are training to deliver a massive nuclear strike in response to an enemy nuclear strike. Separately, it is interesting who this opponent will be. But this is not the question. We now suggest watching one interesting video and moving on to the discussion with you.
Combat alert, missile attack, missile attack, missile attack, until the start of 10, 9, 8, there is the launch of the missile, there is the launch of the missile at missile silo number 8.
До старта 10, 9, 8.
3, 2, 1, 0.
Есть старт ракеты!
Есть старт ракеты по ракетной шахте номер 8.
Sergei, you are definitely one of those people who know the history of gloomy Russia. You know how everything works there. How would you assess Russia's nuclear potential from a technical point of view? And can Russia really launch a missile in real life? Or has everything already rotted there? You know, as usual, the same North Koreans who depict a well-fed life under socialism under the bright star of Kim, do not know what happiness looks like, so they imitate it very far from the close text and from the original, that is, they were able to translate, but even the actors do not know how it is actually played, they watched it in Hollywood. It does not work. Therefore, when Russia, for example, tries to menacingly show everyone its nuclear shield and shows such footage of the Ministry of Defense, it does not understand how it looks from the outside. We have just been shown in a madhouse people in identical bed pajamas with numbers on their chests, infantry, who are playing war. That is, only the Ministry of Defense knows that this is not psychiatry, but a conning tower of submarines. In the rest of the world, this does not look like an army. The Ministry of Defense does not know about this. In principle, of course, they watched Hollywood, they know what American submarines look like. They always have some kind of commander there, some kind of Harrison Ford, he has such a swift look somewhere over the horizon. They are all always in uniform and with shoulder straps. The fact that in the Russian army they wear robes, and these robes were sewn in 1701 on the model of Peter the Great, and they are very similar to either a straitjacket or a sleep kit and look as caricature as possible. They don't understand it. They think that these are such terrible shots that now the whole world will be horrified. And the whole world, even those who made some minimal effort to pay attention to this, were puzzled. What is this with the Russians? Is it the army? It turns out that this is what we are fighting against. And these overfed bores on anabolics, who are they? And where are they at all? Moreover, the real launch of nuclear missiles does not look like this. That is, this is a staging, and there the camera still trembled, because the submarine, apparently, sank to some depth, that is, like a car on suspension in the event of a shot, if some mortar is firing from the platform. And here the submarine trembled in the same way, because there was a shaft going on. How serious it is, see how convincing it looks. Guys, you don't know how to play. The theater of a very bad actor. And this, apparently, should somehow make an impression. And this only amuses. I want to call the children and say, look, it turns out, even when you grow up, if you, for example, are in Russia, then you have the opportunity to stay in the sandbox as an adult. How is it customary among Russians? Because our uncles of this age and such conditions usually do something useful. And these, it seems, are playing something. And they also took individual breathing apparatus on the belly in these red boxes. That is, it is generally impossible to understand whether these in blue pajamas with red boxes are the distribution of sweets or what. That is, when it is necessary to scare the whole world, Putin is no longer afraid. Well, it is impossible to scare Putin. Putin is disgusting, he causes laughter, but he definitely does not cause fear. These men, they also do not cause fear. And this, by the way, is Russian propaganda. This is the Ministry of Defense. It shows what we, if anything, are like in nuclear dust, the whole globe. And no matter what question is asked under such very caricatural shots, clearly at the level of the magazine, wick, and on the magazine, wick, they are so confusing with the pathos of war that I want to say somehow, guys, maybe you can at least change into something. Maybe you can do something serious somehow. Moreover, few people know what a conning tower looks like and that, for example, a submarine, it is always yellow inside, well, ivory. Therefore, the feeling that this is most likely a hospital, clearly a psychiatric department, it covers absolutely everything that should have been caused by the pathos of this picture. You want to throw up your hands and say, I don't believe it. Sergei, the psychiatric hospital is not only where these alleged launches were carried out from, and from where they could have given the order for those very launches. But, Sergei, let's talk about other things. Your Elephant Post came out this week with an article that Russia can finance the war against Ukraine for several more years, despite the overheating of the economy and the huge costs of the Russian dictator. Putin is overheating the economy, but he will still have enough resources to finance the war against Ukraine for a few more years. Here I would like to hear your analysts. Do you really have enough resources to continue the war for a few more years, in your opinion, or can the situation be different? We have never lived to 100 and there is nothing to get used to. Therefore, first of all, we see that even in the most severe conditions of the crisis, the absence of the economy and commodity money relations, which are minimized, North Korea, it may have lost weight itself, but its dictator definitely did not lose weight, because everything is fine with him. Putin is also doing well. The country may have already stumbled into C4. Maybe there are already fainting from hunger and starvation deaths are about to begin. This does not affect Putin in any way. Especially Russia, which used to be integrated into the monetary system of planet Earth in one way or another, but there were loans, credits, money, investments that came from outside in one way or another. From the outside world, they knocked on this barrel. They said, knock knock, Soros is coming, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Do you want to take money? Now there is none of this. It turns out that Russia, in fact, cannot really occupy anywhere there. It has commodity money relations in one way or another. It trades in oil, it trades in diamonds. The world is willingly buying, but there is no free easy money left. What somehow affected Russia in some way? Of course not. That is, Russia is fighting on its own. The fact that in Russia there will be no imported iPhones, imported cars, imported technologies. So Russia girded herself, she, if anything, changed into a laptop, took a Saka, and in this state she can live for centuries. And from generation to generation, people get used to the fact that, well, now this is a given. If in any other country this causes, well, firstly, rejection, and secondly, some active actions, there is a demand from the authorities, and that we feel bad. Or there, for example, in South Korea, when the president of Hyundai, or the CEO of Samsung, is sent to prison for not managing the company well. Shareholders gather and say, we haven't got rich this year. Gen Z, what happened? So you just didn't manage the company well. In fact, we are shareholders, we are the main thing here. Criminal case, prison, resignation. This does not happen in every country, but it definitely does not happen in Russia. Therefore, no matter how much the situation worsens, well, in general, it does not get worse, because the Moscow picture, where it has become a little worse, and the rest of the country, where it has always been bad, is one thing. What, from Sizran's point of view, has changed? Well, Sizran was around her, so she remained Sizran. And, in fact, there is nothing special in Voronezh either. No news. Both in Ivanovka and in Avdiivka, well, the same landscape. As soon as the Second World War ended, as soon as the last tiger was scrapped, nothing has changed since then. And in this regard, Russia is very stable. Russia is absolutely impenetrable. Despite the fact that Putin has his personal money, it is stored outside, in China, in Macau, in gold bars. And if we run out of some money that needs to be paid, well, for example, within the framework of the printing press within the country, it doesn't matter what the inflation is, but salaries have grown, social elevators have started working. Now, finally, the province has received the same long ruble, which it has not seen for decades. For one killed person, they give 25 bags of unbeaten ones. And if suddenly this money runs out altogether, that is, the country ceases to satisfy, then Putin has reserves outside China. He is for his own personal money, and he is still the richest man in the history of planet Earth today. That is, not in the history of this period, not in the history of the oligarchy of the current period, not at the level of presidents and owners of their own countries and personal dictatorships. It is generally the richest. That is, he has the number of zeros after 1 is almost equal to the same slander and Google's demand to pay, yes, or whoever was there just now, when Russia today rolled out a demand to pay them along with the rest of who knows whom. And there was an amount that no TV host could say, because it's bigger than Google. Well, that is, there are a lot of zeros, there are 26 ones. Putin has the same number of zeros after 1, his personal money. In this regard, Russia is too strong for the West. And the West, which, well, of course, does not try to delve into the situation, but tries to somehow react within the framework from 9 in the morning to 6, while it is a working day. Some kind of sanctions, Ramstein, as he thinks, some kind of declaration, some other prohibitions. This does not affect Russia in any way. People are not used to living well. The thaw in Russia is always very short. This rapid period, 5 years, when it was possible to open a business, when it was possible to travel abroad, when it seemed that you were the master of your own destiny, it ended. Now a generation of people has grown up, but some, the older generations, have already become a habit, and the young, they had no other life. This is a given. Here is the generation of those people who are now 20, those who are now 30 years old. These are those who do not remember that, it turns out, there is some other government besides Putin, another policy except genocide and terror. A different media environment than censorship. They just don't know that this happens. And they, for example, are told, it will be even worse. Well, good. Is it great now? Now it is tolerable. Well, it will be a little less tolerable, a little more tolerable. And the West, which analyzes life in Russia from the point of view of its values, listen, they, the Russians, will now run out of hot water. They won't have toothpaste now. 20% of the population of the Russian Federation does not have their own toothbrushes. That is, to talk about the fact that the dentist in the East is not so respected, because not everyone needs his services because they simply do not know who he is. The tooth hurts. Well, okay, they pulled out a neighbor's chainsaw there. That is, this country is so differently structured, it feels so normal in a state of poverty, that it is impossible to calculate it economically at the level of the upcoming crisis, because soon it will run out of money, working capital, loans will dry up, debts will increase, something will have to be done purely economically, and nothing needs to be done. Natural farming, moonshine, jam, the rejection of the state monopoly on alcohol, and this side will last for centuries. Despite the fact that some part of the population will constantly be withdrawn from it for circulation. To war, to repression, to the Gulag. Because World War II and the Gulag, that is, Stalinism, this period of Stalinism, it brought down the country more terribly, it destroyed the country more strongly. And, as the writer Viktor Astafyev said, Stalin spent all the Russian people on the war. And even the Tiva region, which stands right next to the Moscow region, it has not been revived. The entire Tiva region, the city of Tiva itself, which used to be a small Paris, is still the Principality of Tiva. It argued with the Moscow Principality in historical terms. It is as ruined as it is, so it stands. In the Tiva region, the downed planes are still lying around. There is even no one to loot them. They have been lying around since 1942, 1943. There is the Kaliningrad front, the counteroffensive of 1941 near Moscow. Some time ago I went to the crash site of the SB-2 strategic bomber. Here he lies, because there is no one nearby. And forests, in the middle of the forests there are overgrown stone temples. A stone church in Russia was never built in the forest. A stone church was built only in the middle of a very rich village. Not only is this village unrecognizable, there is not even a churchyard left of it. Because the Tiva region, close to Moscow, it has not been revived, and the country has not been revived. That is, Stalin destroyed this country. And what is she? She is still fighting, she is still making tanks, children are still coming from somewhere, because these people do not work very well with their hands, but they work well in some things, so they have children. And there are still Nobel laureates in this country, despite the fact that the damage to Stalinism is irreparable. This is another perverted country. This is a country with a crisis of morality. This is a country where it is an insult to be educated and decent, where a thug and a bandit are the backbone of the state. But she is like this, here she is terrible, miserable. And in this state, how can her situation worsen further than by the fact that there will be no money, so they are not there anyway, by the fact that the economy collapsed. What economy? By the fact that the country has no prospects. So the country always has one perspective. Russia always has a perspective, the Gulag. That is, either today they are released, tomorrow they are imprisoned, or vice versa. Today they are imprisoned, tomorrow they are released. There are no other prospects. And the West, which analyzes Russia, sees that the economic background will definitely catch up with people, and they will be aware of it, and, perhaps, in this regard, they will begin to act decisively. I don't recognize something about Russia in this concept of people I know. The history textbook says that over the past 400 years, they have not allowed themselves to do this, no matter how much their situation worsens. Actually, after the Bolotnikov uprising, there was no one else. 1 million Pugachevs, Stenka Razin. And how many centuries ago was it? Before that, it was all over. To expect that Stenka will reappear now. Maybe Stenka, but if it arises, he immediately goes to the FSB for a salary. There are no other options. Therefore, to ruin Russia with war to a state where it will be forced to ask for peace due to its deteriorating, reached a complete crisis economic condition, well, this will definitely not happen in the next few centuries. Sergei, we have recorded these forecasts, but before we move on to the next topic with you, we remind our audience that you can simply become a member of this stream right now by liking it and writing a comment on where you are watching us from, your city, your country. Right now, we read everything, we see everything. But, Sergei, against the backdrop of Putin giving orders to launch nuclear weapons, about the farce that we have already discussed with you today, materials are increasingly appearing in the Western press, which, obviously, play along with Russian propaganda. Bild, citing a German intelligence source, says that Russia plans to end the war in 2026 and capture key industrial cities in Ukraine. The publication says that Russia seeks to completely seize Donetsk, as well as Kharkiv and Dnipro, and Zaporizhzhia. And here, Sergei, a question for you. How realistic are the goals of both Putin and the Russian army, with what we have now at the front, and will Putin really stop there, or will he go further? When I am required to have card sagacity and fortune-telling on coffee grounds, 2 years ago for some reason I was asked when the war would end, I always said 2027. Everyone fell into a stupor. They said, how come, why can't it be? That is, in the first year, it seemed that the war would definitely not reach 2027. In 2023, it already seemed that it was probably possible. In 2024, and now there is a figure, that is, a certain Bild says that there will definitely be a war by 2026. Well, the next forecast is that the war will still be until 2027. This is such a hot stage. Then it will turn into a smoldering conflict at the level of Israel, disputed territories, when there is no peace and no war. So while Bild has only come close to Sergei Aslanyan in his forecasting, it remains to wait for the next analytical review, when they have a figure of 2027. Also, Sergei, against the background of this material, there is also quite an interesting analysis from the Institute for the Study of War. They say that the war could bring the Russian economy to a catastrophic point of burnout, and the Kremlin's military efforts are putting more and more pressure on the Russian economy, which in turn will create acute challenges to the ability of Russian dictator Putin to support the war in the perspective we have just talked about. In principle, you have quite clearly described the economy and the level of economic development that is currently taking place in Russia, but against the background of the fact that it is definitely not getting better in Russia, can there really be any unrest in the country? For example, economist Ahor Lipset says that by winter, there may be protests against the backdrop of those communal force majeure events that will occur, and the authorities will react to them either with batons or money. Still, I want to ask you about this. Do you expect any unrest and, perhaps, even the appearance of some kind of palace coup in the Kremlin and the person who is capable of it?
Дворцовый переворот в Кремле и тот человек, который на это способен.
It is impossible to calculate this in Russia. As Bismarck said, Russia will respond to any of your calculations with its unpredictable stupidity. Therefore, when economists and political scientists and sociologists try to build a cause, an effect, that in connection with a certain factor or circumstances, some kind of social shift, an explosion with certain consequences will inevitably occur. This is how Russia does not look, this is not how it happens, never. And all of a sudden, anything happens. The Novokirkivsk events were quite sudden in 1962. Or, for example, Fergal is, in general, removed from the throne. And I didn't care about Fergal, but it just so happened that for some reason in a whole single city, and then in a whole region, this nevertheless served as a trigger. And we see how a year ago in Zarnazan in Kazakhstan, where the government has not yet yielded its despotism to all other socialist countries, if anything, it could very quickly pacify anyone. It also broke out there, and for some communal reasons. And such surprises, they happen in Russia, yes. Because to count on the fact that the roller of economic indignation will finally squeeze people into the streets, and they will begin to demand something. No, it is excluded. Preparation of any kind of uprising, political actions, some kind of creation of a new party, some kind of underground partisan detachment. No, it is useless, because the Russians are never able to agree. They can't even agree on three. That is, when three Russians share 3 bubbles for a brother and a manufactory to eat behind the garages, and there is a feeling that they have finally agreed that after all, 3 bubbles for a brother. But then one of them definitely gets in the eye, but then it turned out that no, after all, you deceived me. That is, even in this very minimal social space, which is rather poorly organized, you respect me on the impromptu, what is your name, let's go have a drink, it's still a discord, we still didn't agree. Well, at least with a high probability. And in Russia, we should expect some meaningful actions, because life will become worse, life will become scarier, life will become unbearable, no, of course, under no circumstances. At the level of some communal troubles, these communal troubles, they train people, temper them for several years. In COVID, they started and continued. For example, when an entire region was sinking in the spring, Orsk was sinking there. And some people took their fate into their own hands with their own hands, dug a dam and saved their small village. For which they then tried, in fact, to punish them. In Russia, this is exactly what it looks like, when the same Philistines in their yards, not getting help from the council, took up the asphalt, rushed and called people, a team of professional workers with professional equipment, paid them, and they rolled the yard into the asphalt, that is, they cleaned the holes. After that, the instigators were detained, the asphalt was broken, because you did not have a piece of paper permitting this type of activity. Therefore, live in holes. Even this did not cause outrage at the time. That is, people were able to organize a certain process in the name of themselves, in order to asphalt the yard, so that they could live without holes, not in the dirt. They were subjected to repressions, and these repressions had no consequences. Because people are intimidated, people fled, well, someone even sat down. Then, however, they were released, well, in view, obviously, of injustice, and nevertheless the state coped with this task. When in 2008, when some signs of democracy were still being worn out in the country, when people still considered themselves the object of not so much the state's concern, but at least minimal attention, that is, they were taken into account. And in 2008 for economic reasons. Simply because it was necessary to organize a market for left-hand drive cars. The Far East was banned from right-hand drive. Economically, they simply raised duties. And the whole business became unprofitable. And 12 million people live beyond the Urals in Russia. Officially 20. That is, 147 million officially live in Russia. In fact, no, Russia has a little less than 100 million people. If you look at the map from the Urals to the right to the far east, you will see that 20 million are promised there. No, 12 million live there. Of these, 40% are able-bodied population. Of these 40%, 35% were engaged in right-hand drive. They sold, brought, repaired, resold, stolen, interrupted numbers, were engaged in maintenance, buying spare parts. This region of the Urals, despite the fact that there is a defense industry, a cosmodrome, it lived on the right-hand drive. Everyone was listed somewhere on the railway, somewhere as a watchman, and everyone traded in right-hand drive. And then another sabotage idea comes from Moscow. Let us save you from the possibility of making money for anyone, because the region held on to this. What happened? A small demonstration gathered in Vladivostok. That is, out of these 40% of the able-bodied population, from 12 million, well, of course, we have no right to expect a million. But when they cut off the branch on which you are sitting, and you can no longer feed yourself in any way, and a decree comes to you from Moscow that makes you die of hunger, about 1,000 or 2,000 people are gathered in Vladivostok. And the Zuba OMON battalion near Moscow comes on tour and needs everyone in blood. And that's all. And at this point, the region quietly disperses, some to the Krasnodar territory, some to work in some neighboring countries. Because all these 12 million people who will not survive without right-hand drive, they did not survive without right-hand drive, they quietly accepted their share. The most violent were beaten to death by democratizers, the most violent were imprisoned. To expect that something will suddenly happen in Russia? No, but it may be sudden. And this suddenness is what distinguishes the great Russian people, and their greatness, and their megalomania, because it is completely unpredictable. It can be anything. Someone got into the car, and they didn't like it, because they immediately decided to lynch them, and they didn't let them lynch them. Or somewhere someone said something to someone, or some interconfessional, inter-ethnic version, when in a tavern, well, these with long noses, and those with short noses, and they did not share something. Usually, listen, they didn't divide the girl, yes, but it doesn't matter anymore, because everyone grabbed her by the stools, then by the knives, and then she went. And here, the authorities, of course, will be able to work preemptively. They will not be able to predict this, but they will definitely respond to this with such repressions, such a powerful response from the punishes that it will dissolve for very many years. When the whole region came out for Fergalo and ran for 6 months, it turned out that the government was based on fear. If there is no fear, then there is no power. And in other cases, there are always more riot police, and they bring fear with them and therefore they will extinguish it. They will beat to death. Someone will be beaten to death by democratizers, especially since winter is ahead, and if you are unconscious and that's it, your frostbitten corpse will not even be able to be resuscitated. But outbursts, of course, are possible, absolutely accidental, completely spontaneous, for some nonsense. But since, of course, everyone understands everything, life ends, it becomes impossible to live. Well, as we remember, wonderful film, The Man from the Boulevard des Capuchins, explodes. Harry is where my stake is. And this became the reason for the fight. When everyone in the tavern killed each other, everyone, finally, climbed up on the head with stools because, well, there was something there, like, not a fried steak. That is, the minimum reason with maximum consequences. Completely domestic level. But everyone already wanted to fight. To fight in Russia, one way or another, there is a readiness. The authorities are always afraid. It will detonate suddenly and it is impossible to calculate in advance, because the reason for the consequential connection does not exist as a reason. Friends, and you write in the comments, in the meantime, in your opinion, is any unrest or protests possible in Russia? I am interested in your opinion. And also do not forget to write your cities, from where you are watching us. We are also interested in the geography of our audience. Sergei, let's talk about the DPRK, which is also a hot topic this week. After all, the New York Times says that the military from the DPRK arrived in the Kursk region. This is reported by our president, and our intelligence, and our military. Here is the question, in general, I would like to hear your analytics on what conditions Putin nevertheless forced the DPRK to transfer its troops, 12,000. Obviously, the figure may increase. And the CNN also writes that the United States called on China to put pressure on the DPRK to return troops from Russia. Why, in your opinion, is the United States asking China to put pressure? And what role does China play in this deal? This, by the way, is the most indicative episode in the entire showdown related to North Korea on the front near Kursk. Because when suddenly America, the most important country on planet Earth, sees a situation that looks like a conflict of interest, it does not interfere in any way. You see, the telephone receiver, hello, Dad, there is a fat boy in the sandbox who has become a hooligan, please, drag him by the ear. Because to appeal to China for the great Xi Jinping, which for some reason must be more influential than the son of the Korean nation, Kim III, the Radiant. It is absolutely impossible to imagine this. And when there is a coup in Myanmar, you call India and say, Modi, listen, why did you have something stabbed there again in a neighboring country behind the fence? Don't you look there? You should go there, or something, on a business trip. Well, you take care of the guys, otherwise there are already severed heads rolling in the streets. There is some kind of defective Nobel laureate getting in the way. Come on, Modi, figure it out. Is this how it happens? It doesn't happen that way. And this, in fact, is exactly what Russia is teaching the whole world to do, that it turns out that it is possible to ask for someone and somehow twist and win something for someone. When, for example, Russia is there, it is either at war with its hybrid technologies or not. Before that, there were 8 years of the DPR-LPR, and everyone somehow got used to the fact that this is indistinct and does not mean what it is. This invasion of the Russian army into the Donetsk region is not an invasion of the Russian army into the Donetsk region. That's not true, you know. You need to call and find out. No, you have to come and punch him in the face. Oh, no, you know, it's not customary. We were on the street, we have a completely different cultural code. And here America is, in fact, half a step away from legitimate intervention. Not only is she not going to do it, she is still trying to find someone who will somehow persuade someone. Can someone reason with this impudent bad boy in the sandbox? Why on earth? And why is it China? Because someone thinks that North Korea is dependent on China. North Korea is directly dependent on Japan. Because the only thing that is seriously quoted in North Korea, vital and supplied directly, is whiskey from Japan, which Kim III Radiant drinks, because he cannot live without this whiskey. This is his favorite software, it is Japanese. Everything else Korean people will simply eat worse, but in no case will Dad drink less. And therefore, when America says, well, you will figure it out, it means that it is not going to do anything at all. And she comes up with the most ridiculous and most absurd solution to the problem, to ask someone in favor of someone somewhere to stop hooliganism. That is, a hooligan beats a woman in the alley with his boots, policemen pass by and say, listen, is there a senior in the house? And maybe he's a hooligan, he'll come out now and talk to him somehow, but what do I have to do? Yes, in fact, you should, you're a policeman, this is your task. No, well, there must be someone else, why should I be? And what, in fact, is the background of this excitement when North Korea gave troops on this matter? He was puzzled because it means that there is no longer any excuse for not sending NATO troops into Ukraine. If Russia has brought North Korean troops into this war, making him already a proven part of this landscape, this scenario, North Korean troops are fighting in this war.
Уже доказанной частью этого ландшафта, этого сценария на этой войне воюют.
And why aren't the French fighting? And why don't the English fight? And why don't the Germans, Australians, and so on fight? Why don't they fight? And that's why they don't fight, because they don't want to. And therefore, let's not seriously interact with North Korea in any way, resolve issues at all. It wasn't the Americans who called Kim and said, stop it, it's the Chinese, could you look over the fence, because something is wrong there. Whether it is happening or not, in fact, of course, There has already been enough confirmation of this from intelligence, although North Korean soldiers have not yet been properly seen. Well, now the first batch will die, someone will be captured, it will become clear, it will even be interesting to talk to these people. But the presence of Korean troops, in principle, does not have any significance, except for political. In theory, it unties the hands of the West, and the West does not want to untie in any case, under any circumstances. And for Putin, the benefit is not in the fact that he was taken and helped with troops, but before that he was helped with shells. He bought shells. In fact, he also rented these soldiers, and he was always, if necessary, ready to rent in North Korea, first for logging, now in the trenches. Here the benefit is different. And now you owe me. After I took your soldiers, I fed them. I allowed you to feel the strength of our defense alliance. Now, at the expense of me and due to the fact that you have rented out your soldiers, and not only directly earned on this, you have also received the support of an entire superpower in the eyes of the whole world and have become the main hooligan in your region. And now you can attack South Korea, Taiwan, China, Japan, Malaysia, Hong Kong, whoever you want, because everyone understands that the Gopnik will be supported. And now, if it is necessary, for example, to oppose something to the troops, say, France, which came to the aid of the armed forces of Ukraine, or the troops of Great Britain, or the Bundeswehr, which will take part in this war. What can be opposed to this? North Korea, which on a call, well, since who do you owe me, attacks, who will they say? For example, South Korea. And then the whole world, instead of helping Ukraine, help South Korea, because North Korea attacked it, or North Korea is attacking, for example, Taiwan. And everyone is helping Taiwan, but because there is definitely no time for Ukraine. And this is the benefit. The benefit is that now Kim has received support in the eyes of the whole world. The fact that this is a colossus with feet of clay is known only to those who are in the know. Everyone else is out of the loop, everyone is already scared. Sergei, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your excellent analytics, for your opinion and position. Sergei Aslanyan, host of Khodorkovsky Life, answered our questions today. Do watch this broadcast, like him, write a comment where you are watching us from, your city, your country, write your opinion, whether you agree, for example, with Sergei or not, it is also interesting. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and see you soon on channel 24. Goodbye.